This is a book about fucking. Specifically, it's a book about the people who get paid to fuck and people who pay to fuck them. Nobody is making you read it. Those are the opening lines of The Fuck Business, a definitive tour through the world of sex for pay by Michael Troy, a memoir by Michael Troy. I'm sure that's a pseudonym, by the way, and published this June 2025 by Hamilcar Publications. It's about Michael Troy's life caught up in the sex business. First as a teenager, getting $5 blowjobs from prostitutes in the freezing cold back alleys of the Combat Zone. That's Boston's adult entertainment district. Then moving on to become an underage actor in Loops. Those are 10-minute slapdash but professionally made smut films. And then, or perhaps simultaneously, working as a small-time pimp. Then as a whorehouse operator and adult party host / gigolo. He puts himself, by the way, more drolly than braggadociously, in the Fraternal Order of the Extremely Endowed. And finally, he is a lifelong friend, lover, husband, and client of prostitutes. The book at first does not live up to those astonishing opening lines, but ultimately it does. It ends up being moving, illuminating, disturbing, seditious, much more seditious than 99.9% of the fiction that I've read on the subject. Because in the fuck business, it's the stuff of professional experience, not of the imagination or of diversion. But before I get into all that, to warm us up, let me talk first about another memoir, a classic about the sex business, this one published in 1969, also illuminating, disturbing, and seditious, but more angry than moving, I think. Pimp, The Story of My Life by Iceberg Slim. That's the street name of Robert Beck. Pimp is a classic because it helped create a modern American archetype. The ostentatiously dressed urban black pimp who lords it over his whores like a stoic pasha over his harem. Pimping ain't no sex game, it's a skull game, writes Iceberg Slim. And the book has some stunning prose in it, like the ice cream yellow moon seemed close enough to lick, or the first time that he meets his mentor in pimping, a guy named Sweet Jones. He goes over Sweet Jones' luxury Chicago apartment and sees him sitting on his white velour couch. And he writes, he looked like a huge black fly in a bucket of milk. At times, Pimp can be a feast of language that's amped up by black street vernacular. However, gotta say it, the sex scenes in the book read like smutty romance. Like something out of a smutty romance novel. Like she blacked out 4 times. She couldn't pull back from the thrilling and awful torture. The sensibility of Pimp verges on sadistic. He has wet dreams about kicking around pleading whores with shoes as sharp as daggers. And he whips his bottom whore, that's his most important prostitute, with a coat hanger when she gets out of line, and it works. He writes, I gotta con them that Lincoln never freed the slaves, which totally undermines his argument in the book that pimping is a kind of racial rebellion. He writes, I'm not going to be some flunky in this white man's world. I get it. I don't doubt that it was extremely tough for a black man, an intelligent black man, to make a name for himself and to achieve professional success in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, but I don't know. I mean, to buck the system by recreating in his stable the world of the bastard white man, that's just not coherent to me. Ultimately, He repents for his erring ways, what he calls his ghastly life, warning young men and women away from the life he led. But to me it reads disingenuously. I think the book ends up celebrating what it claims to condemn. Perhaps it falls into the category of those modern day Machiavellian how-to manuals, the type of book that, deliberately or not, teaches us how to manipulate the psychologically damaged and weak. You know, like, for example, The Game, that book on pickup artistry by Neil Strauss, or The 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. Now there is a fascinating and seditious book. Also, I should say that narratively speaking, Pimp can be unsophisticated at times, like when we'll have these random run-ins in the street with those who crossed him in the past, or the sappy stuff with his mom late in the book. That stuff reads like poorly embellished pulp fiction. Look, Pimp has some harrowing and eye-opening scenes about his childhood and about street life, but mostly I would recommend it for its voice and for its cultural impact. Authentic and real, that depends on the scene, I think. I think The Fuck Business is much more authentic and real. He strives more for truth than for effect. Also, it ends much more strongly than it starts, while Pimp starts much more strongly than it ends. Pimp kind of peters out, while The Fuck Business builds to a powerful conclusion. The early part of The Fuck Business has its moments. It's never boring, but there's nothing especially remarkable about it. The adult film stuff, for instance, Troy will write about the unsanitary conditions or the physical requirements or the personnel, but with too much emotional distance, it ends up being a missed opportunity, I think. I mean, he worked in the adult film business as a teenager. Why not write about that from an intimately personal point of view? I just don't get it. For the first, let's say, 30% of the book, Troy will write about the inner workings of the sex business. Generalities, oddities, myths, quirks, certain characters, but he basically leaves himself out of it. It's purely observational, written with detachment, or at most a kind of dry humor. But all along the reader is getting these wild throwaway details about Troy. About how at 15 years old he's pimping out this 13-year-old girl and they're great friends and lovers. Or how in his late teens he's married to one woman but living with another woman who is the mother of his child. And we learn that he's going to get married twice more relatively soon, all while he's visiting prostitutes and maintaining various lovers. All of this is written about matter-of-factly, glancingly. When Troy becomes an established adult, about 40% of the way through the book, that's when I think The Fuck Business takes on consistent literary merit. That's when I think Troy takes full advantage of every opportunity that his material gives him. That's when the book becomes the intimate story of a true sexual adventurer with tremendous psychological insight, not only into himself, but into others. It's a fearless book, disregarding all taboos. He writes on bravely, clearly aware of how he must appear to readers, especially to self-righteous readers, but forges on nonetheless, without spite, without defiance, without trying to shock, not really explaining himself or his motives, just following his bliss, carefree enough to be funny at times, but never tasteless. But now the scenes are charged with emotion. When he's running that whorehouse in the early 80s, and he tells us all these anecdotes about interactions with clients and with prostitutes, what we learn about, for example, undercurrents of anti-Semitism or pedophilia in society, about what the average man is really drawn to sexually, it is mind-blowing, or perhaps totally predictable if you really think about it. The scenes are subtle and heartbreaking. Although the sex, at least on the surface, might be performative or irresponsible or predatory, I mean, as a gigolo, he was regularly paid by husbands to have sex with their wives while the husbands and wives spoke intimately. So Troy got to see couples at their most exposed and vulnerable. In the last, let's say, 20% of the book, when Troy gets older and he leaves the sex business, he writes about his life as a customer, as a John. That's the most uncomfortable stuff to read. I mean, is Troy taking advantage of these women, sometimes very young women, or are they taking advantage of him? I dare say that it's not always clear. At the end of the book, he's 60 years old, and he's having a passionate, wildly reckless affair with this 19-year-old prostitute with a drug problem. They are making love with complete abandon on a regular basis. The sex is almost transcendent, and yet he knows that she's fucking him, at least in part, because of the drug money. All right? Because of the ambiguity of motives, because he falls in love despite the squalor, you almost get the sense that he's turned on by sure doom. By beautiful young women that he knows, and perhaps they themselves know, will end up as the saddest and most sordid of cases. And that adds to the eroticism for him and perhaps for them. The brutally and tragically fleeting nature of this young prostitute's beauty. How is it, or what did Shakespeare write? I think in one of his sonnets, lilies fester far worse than weeds. Like when beauty rots, it stinks much more than when some nondescript plant rots. Okay? He catches these women in gorgeous flight just before they take a nosedive into complete degeneracy. Okay? And that last ditch, fuck all, hurtling towards hell, fuels their sexual passion. With the current ubiquity of internet porn, of cam girls, etc., I suspect that the business model for the sex business has changed quite a bit, but not so much the psychology. What makes people enter that world? In search of thrills or adventure or momentary solace. And that's why I think that books like Pimp and The Fuck Business will always be relevant. While in Pimp, Iceberg Slim writes about or gives a kind of Freudian explanation for his decisions, of suppressed mother hatred or of abuse leading to abuse, and then his kind of pat epiphany of the wrongness of his ways when he's locked up in solitary confinement in Cook County Correctional House of Corrections in Illinois, and then his return to his mother as the kind of remorseful prodigal son, both of them reformed, and then him proselytizing against pimping, what his book actually glorifies. Well, Iceberg Slim puts all that forward. Troy makes no such grandiose claims. He just basically says, this is the life I've chosen, be what it may. At the end, he writes poignantly, it's depressing to know that for however long I live going forward, I won't fuck as much for the rest of my life as I would have on a good day when I was running the whorehouse. My copy of Pimp has a blurb from the rapper Ice-T. As close to the truth as you can get without going there yourself. And another one from Irving Welsh, the author of Trainspotting. Slim told it as it was, without compromise. While I recommend Pimp for being seminal and for being brightly stylized just because it's brutal and gritty and relentlessly realistic at times, that doesn't mean that he was being authentic or not in any rigorous sense. He was fronting. He was putting on a show that was part of his shtick. Michael Troy does tell it like it is. That's my take. With the fuck business, you really are getting as close as you can to a certain type of outlier as you're ever going to get without becoming one yourself.